Well-heeled terror. 3 more suspects arrested, including 2 teens from wealthy families in connection with the ISIS-style terror plot in Michigan. One of the teens was trying to escape. I'll tell you where and why. Plus, the latest on the horrific UPS plane crash in Louisville that killed at least 9, with more than a dozen missing. And should Republicans be worried? I'll talk to D.C. Bureau Chief Josh Christensen about how the GOP could bounce back in time for next fall's midterms after big losses on Tuesday. Those stories and more today, Thursday, November 6th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. Now that candidate Zohran Mamdani has become Mayor-Elect Zohran Mamdani, the tension between the Democratic Socialist, soon to be in charge of the Big Apple, and the president has officially taken off. Mamdani fired the first shots Tuesday night in his victory speech.
New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants. And as of tonight, led by an immigrant. So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us.
And the president predictably responded.
The communists, Marxists, socialists, and globalists had their chance, and they delivered nothing but disaster. And now let's see how a communist does in New York. We're going to see how that works out.
Mamdani has promised to leverage the courts to battle any attempts by the president to wield federal power in New York City by doing things like cutting funding or sending in the National Guard. And while criticism of Mamdani from Republicans is to be expected, he also got a bit of unsolicited advice from within his own party. Reliable left-wing commentator Van Jones said this on CNN after Mamdani's victory speech.
I felt like there's a little bit of a character switch here where the warm, open, embracing guy that's close to working people was not on stage tonight.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy warned us, and now he's making good. He's canceling flights due to the government shutdown. Now, Duffy says the FAA will slash 10% of U.S. flights in 40 major cities beginning tomorrow. That could mean the grounding of as many as 4,000 flights. Not what you want to hear as we head into the holiday season. He stopped short of revealing which airports will be the most impacted and assured the country that the measure is proactive and not reactive. It's not due to a current threat to the safety of air travelers. The move will give some relief to overworked air traffic controllers who are working without pay thanks to the ongoing and record-breaking government shutdown. The lack of funding comes on top of an already well-reported shortage of those air traffic controllers across the country. 2 New Jersey teens from affluent families have been arrested for their involvement in the ISIS-inspired plot to shoot up an LGBT club in Michigan. Earlier this week, I told you about the 2 arrests in Dearborn, but now Milo Shaderet, the 19-year-old son of an Iranian-American poet and a college professor, has been arrested at his father's home in the upscale town of Montclair, New Jersey. A second suspect, 19-year-old Tomas Khan Guzel, was arrested at Newark Airport as he waited to board a flight to Turkey. Authorities say the teen's eventual plan was to travel to Syria and train with ISIS there. Guzel, who is the son of the head of the United Nations Women's Entrepreneurship Program, was reportedly planning to make the trip on November 17th, but he moved up the timeline after word spread about the initial arrests. Meanwhile, authorities arrested a third suspect in Michigan, 19-year-old Ayoub Nasser of Dearborn, Michigan. He was taken into custody and charged with conspiring to provide material to support ISIS. This brings the total to 5 adults involved in the alleged plot so far, plus a minor. Democrats are celebrating big victories in 3 key elections. The New York City mayor's race, as I mentioned, but also governor's races in both New Jersey and Virginia. President Trump had an uncharacteristically somber reaction to the losses.
I don't think it was good for Republicans. I don't think it was good. I'm not sure it was good for anybody. But we had an interesting evening, and we learned a lot. And we're going to talk about that.
So with a year until the highly consequential midterm elections, where do Republicans go from here? The Post's Washington bureau chief, Josh Christensen, spoke with someone who knows a little bit about this kind of thing, and he joins me now. So Josh, you talked with former House Speaker Newt Gingrich on Wednesday, and he suggested a key issue that Republicans need to wrap their arms around is affordability. What does he mean by that, and how did Democrats use that issue specifically successfully this campaign cycle?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. The former House Speaker Newt Gingrich spoke with me and my colleague Stephen Nelson, and he shared some of the insights he thought Republicans should take away from this election. Some of the main things he saw were that exit polls were showing that the economy was a top issue for voters, and for that reason, he suggested a robust legislative agenda to counter that before the midterms, specifically forming what he called essentially a 21st century affordability act. That would be something that he thought would be the greatest test of Trump's second term and something that both MAGA and centrist Republicans could rally around to offer a better life for Americans in the midterm elections.
Now, the economy is something that the president has run on several times. It's something that his base often lauds him for, and the president claims kind of all the time that prices are lower since he took office. But it seems like the Americans who voted this week voted in such a way that suggests they don't feel like what he's saying there is necessarily true, at least when it comes to their pocketbooks. So what's the president's move here?
He gave a speech in Wednesday in Miami, and he talked about some of the concerns that people had about the economy. He had a lot of talking points about different economic indicators that have been more positive this year. But what we learned talking to a lot of Republicans is that many of them are indicating next year will actually be when a lot of these markers that people view as critical to filling out these surveys saying that they actually are on the right track with their finances won't really take effect for the immediate future, but will take effect certainly before the midterms. When the president goes out and talks about the economy, he'll often stick to pointing out an increase in real wages, particularly for blue collar workers. There's some other indicators that he points to. He often talks about the tariffs, revenue, and that sort of thing. So this is both a communication issue and something that Republicans are going to keep beating the drum over, but this is also something that many of the actions he's taken in the first year are still being worked out and still not finding their way to people's pocketbooks.
Now, I want to turn to another issue that Americans have a lot of opinions on. It is very divisive, particularly this year, immigration. The president told 60 Minutes this week that he doesn't think the ICE raids are going far enough. But Republicans lost a ton of ground with Hispanic voters this year. This, of course, compared to the presidential election last year. So do you think that will change the way the administration operates when it comes to immigration and these ICE raids?
It depends on whether they listen to some of the moderate Republicans who have already been calling for this before the election. You saw representatives like Maria Salazar in Florida talking about this today, talking about the massive losses in the Hispanic vote that occurred during Election Day in 2025. And it's something that they have already introduced legislation to that effect, trying to have more of a two-track immigration approach where there is an emphasis on retaining and supporting people who wish to legally immigrate, who may already be here and naturalize, that sort of thing, as opposed to a lot of the actions that have been taken by the administration against migrants who've committed crimes, particularly violent crimes. That's been a big focus of a lot of the DHS operations. And so there's going to be a difference in rhetoric you'll see from Capitol Hill Republicans, and it's up to the White House to decide whether they're going to partner with some of them on these bills and try to have this approach where they have open arms to people who are perhaps part of this coalition that went for Trump in 24, but as we saw in 25 was not so willing to cast a ballot for Republicans.
And you're talking specifically here about the rhetoric on Capitol Hill, but I have to imagine we should also keep an eye on how the day-to-day looks for ICE, because as you and I have talked about on the podcast several times, there was such an infusion of money with the big, beautiful bill. It's now going to be a question of, it was all about quantity versus quality, upping the numbers, the thousands and thousands and thousands a week, a month, a year. Now I wonder if we're going to be seeing a retooling of where they're allocating their resources.
I haven't seen any signs of that yet from the White House. Of course, we know the big, beautiful bill had a lot of money specifically for border defense. This is something that, members of both parties, you talk to John Fetterman and the Democrats or other members and kind of the bipartisan problem solvers caucus in the House, they were in favor of a robust kind of border security regime that would keep illegal border entries to a minimum, and they reached historic lows earlier this year in June. But there hasn't been as much of a kind of discussion about what might be the next steps in terms of, whether there's going to be a reallocation of some of that funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill to perhaps other avenues of legal immigration and kind of perhaps fast tracking that. But that's certainly something to look out for.
I have to imagine all of, politics in every state right now is dealing with that post-election hangover, and then they're going to be able to start kind of course correcting moving forward. Josh, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Officials in Louisville, Kentucky are offering new details surrounding the horrific crash of a UPS plane that exploded into a fireball shortly after takeoff this week. After reviewing CCTV footage of the incident, officials from the National Transportation Safety Board say that the left engine detached from the wing during takeoff. Now, the death toll in the crash has risen to at least 9, but that number is expected to jump even higher after more than a dozen families have reported missing loved ones. The plane was heading to Hawaii and was carrying a crew of 3 and 50,000 gallons of jet fuel when it exploded. Investigators confirmed that the plane's black box has been recovered as they continue to search for clues into just what went wrong here. Now, based on some of the publicly available and really crazy footage that was captured, it appeared that one of the plane's wings was on fire as it took off. Then the aircraft flips on its side and crashes to the ground, just engulfed in flames at Muhammad Ali International Airport. Now, the international shipping giant is headquartered in Louisville, and it's the city's largest employer. And finally today, have you ever watched a TV show or a movie that's just so bad that you actually suffer secondhand embarrassment for the people who made it? Like Twilight? That's just how bad Kim Kardashian's new show, All's Fair, is. It's so bad, in fact, that it has a Rotten Tomatoes score of, drumroll please, 0%. Yeah, ouch. For reference, that score puts it in the company of such classics as Real Rob Schneider's attempt at post-SNL glory in the 90s, The Michael Richards Show, and Pussycat Dolls Present The Search for the Next Doll. And for what it's worth, our own post-reviewer agrees, calling the show, quote, as the kids say, cringe. The Hulu show comes from creator Ryan Murphy, who has had his fair share of hits, though this seems to be a miss, a big one. The legal drama, a Sheryl Sandberg lean-in era tale that follows several women working at their own divorce law firm, is a decade stale, according to our internal experts at these kinds of things. Casting Kim Kardashian no doubt attracted eyeballs to the pilot, but reviewers here are quoting that time that Barbara Walters told her she didn't have any talent. Now, I would not be worth my salt as a journalist if I didn't do my own research, so I'm going to watch this weekend. I'll report back with my review next week. Maybe it's so bad, it's good. Like Twilight. Good thing we don't have to worry about that kind of thing here because the New York Postcast is a 10 out of 10. So don't forget, like and follow wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.